All right, welcome back to the My Sugar-Free Journey podcast, and we are here for the first of hopefully a long series with Carrie Brown, where we get to kind of look into stuff about cooking. So we've talked about my experiences with cooking on this podcast in the past. I love eating cooking. I don't often like the work of cooking, but I do all the cooking in the house. But most of what I do is grill meat and maybe steam some vegetables or saute some vegetables. And we eat probably I'd say probably the same 6 vegetables over and over and over again, and the same 3 meats over and over and over again. So it's like chicken, pork, beef, and then a couple different vegetables. So I am so interested. I'm so ready to pick somebody's brain who knows a lot more about cooking than I do, and can maybe give me some ideas and some new things that I can do. So I'm excited to have Carrie Brown on the podcast. Welcome to the show, Carrie.
Thank you. This is super exciting. There's a dearth of chefs talking about how to cook on podcasts in the keto low carb space. So I'm happy to, hopefully I will somehow at least a little bit fill that gap for people who love eating food, love talking about food, want some new ideas, want to get better at cooking, want to make keto food that tastes better than the food they've eaten thus far, which is always my goal.
Absolutely. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about thickeners. And this interests me for a couple of reasons, but one big one. I guess it was probably about 2 years ago. So my wife loves chicken fried steak. And I figured out how to do the chicken fried steak, how to do all that with the pork rinds. And I think we use a little bit of almond meal as the coating, fried them in coconut oil, and that turned out good. But man, the gravy, good grief, the gravy was tough to do. I couldn't figure out how to do it without flour, and what I ended up using was arrowroot starch, and I ended up not liking the way that turned out. So we've taken gravy type meals kind of out of the rotation because we don't I just couldn't figure out good gravy. So I am so excited to have somebody on here that knows.
Oh my goodness, you're going to be the gravy god after this.
I can't wait.
All the gravies are coming back to Arn's dinner table.
That's fantastic. And so that's definitely what I want to do. So let's start with what was I doing wrong? What do you, because I was using, so what was I using? I was using like coconut flour. That didn't work. We used a couple different flours. That didn't work because I in the past I was just using flour to thicken. And then I used arrowroot starch, and it got more gummy than gravy like. And I finally threw it in my hands. So what do we need to know about thickeners?
So what the traditional thickeners thicken because they are starches. They get wet, you heat them, and they swell. And that's how thickeners work. That's how starchy thickeners work, is that the action of water and heat makes the starch cells swell, which absorbs the liquid. That's what makes it get thick. So when we're thinking about pre-keto thickeners, we're thinking flour, we're thinking cornstarch or corn flour as it's known elsewhere outside
cornstarch. Yeah, that was.
We're thinking tapioca, potato starch, arrowroot, semolina. Those are the things we think about. And actually, you mentioned arrowroot. So good point is that arrowroot is 100% starch. Now, I think a lot of, well, not a lot, but some people on keto are very misguided if they think that they use arrowroot. And that's because some of the bloggers use arrowroot, not realizing that it's 100% starch. And I think that came from the paleo days. I think the paleo bloggers are okay with arrowroot, but of course, paleo is not keto. So if you're trying to keep the starch super low, if you want to be low carb or keto, you can't use arrowroot. So if you're reading something that says oh, and it's got arrowroot in, run away, because arrowroot is 100% starch.
That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, because I can guarantee you the reason I found that out is I just started Googling, keto gravy recipes and because I think I still have in the back of my pantry like 6 different thickeners that we were trying, and I'll never use them again.
Yeah. So arrowroot is, just to be clear, arrowroot is a no for low carb or keto because
Interesting.
it's 100% starch. So you may as well, if you're going to use arrowroot, you may as well use cornstarch.
Flour. Yeah.
And you wouldn't do that.
Okay.
So those are the things that, and there are 3 ways to thicken. You can use a starch or a starchy thing. You can use protein. There are some proteins that thicken, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then there's also mechanical. So there's methods that you can use that will thicken, and the best thing that comes immediately to mind is mayonnaise. So there's nothing, there's no ingredient that is making it thick. It's the mechanical whipping, the creating of the emulsion between the egg yolk and the oil. It's a mechanical thickener because that process of making the mayonnaise is actually what makes you have this lovely, thick, viscous mayonnaise. So that's a mechanical thickener. It's nothing about the ingredients particularly. It mechanically makes an emulsion. So the 3 things. But most people think, particularly when they think of gravies, they think about the starches. So what a lot of people do is they assume that when you move to keto low carb baking, you tend to reach for the almond flour or the coconut flour or maybe some psyllium husk because you're using those instead of flour. Therefore, it kind of to make sense that you would try and use those as thickeners, but they really don't thicken. And here's why. The flours, the whole wheat flours, the potato starch, the arrowroot, the cornstarch are starches. They're carbohydrates. Coconut flour and almond flour really aren't. They're fats. So they don't absorb liquid like the starches do, which is why they're not very good at thickening.
Yeah, I can attest to that. They do not thicken gravy, I can guarantee you.
So out of the 2, almond flour is a huge no. It simply doesn't thicken. Well, it thickens by virtue of the fact that if you put something solid into a liquid and stir it, your resulting thing is going to be thicker, but it's been thickened, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Coconut flour does absorb liquid, but it's very, very inconsistent. It tends to be gritty, and it's very it can tend to be a bit coconutty.
Right.
But for me, it's the worst thing about coconut, apart from the fact that it doesn't do a great job, is that it's very inconsistent. And when I'm developing recipes or I'm trying to teach people how to cook, I only want to give them things that I know are going to be consistent, because I want people to be brilliant in the kitchen, but I want it for them to have the same results every single time. So if it doesn't work consistently, then that's a no as far as I'm concerned.
Perfect.
One of the things I absolutely hate is people wasting money and time on making recipes that they then can't eat or don't enjoy, or make them think that keto food is nasty, therefore I can't stick to it. That's like the thing that gets me most upset. So my goal is to help you be super successful 100% of the time, so that you don't waste time, you don't waste money, and it's super easy to stick on keto because the food's delicious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can tell you, coconut flavored gravy over chicken fried steak, and that's a no-go. It's just not tasty at all. I
have a giggle every time you say chicken fried steak. I have to giggle because when I moved because I'm not American. Well, I am now, but not originally. And when I first moved here, I took myself on this thing called the Big Breakfast Adventure, and I went around Seattle. This is how I learned my way around Seattle, was that I went to every restaurant and ate breakfast there. Like every weekend I would go somewhere different to eat breakfast. And I remember going to this restaurant and see chicken fried steak, and I was so confused because I don't know. Is this chicken? Is it like, what is this? And it actually took me a lot of searching on the internet and a lot of kind of research to figure out what chicken fried steak actually is. So every time you say it, I have a little giggle because I remember how confused I was about chicken fried steak.
Well, sometimes we'll call it country fried steak, but yeah.
Well, that was the thing, that you don't call it a consistent thing. Different parts of the country call it different things. And so my search took me, people are going, really? You searched for a long time? I'm like, yes, because it would come up as all these different things and all these different names. And I'm like, is that the same thing? Is that different? Is that, what is that? So
do you not have that dish in England, or do you call it something else?
No, we don't. We don't have that. That's one of the strangely American things I've learned about since I moved here. But yeah, that was one of the most confusing breakfasts I've ever eaten.
Well, I'll be honest with you. If I ever went somewhere for breakfast and they brought me pork and beans for breakfast, I'd be upset. I'd be like, "What is this? This is a dinner food. This is not a breakfast food." So you Englanders have your own odd things as well.
Oh, we totally do. We just don't think they're odd. But yeah. Sausage and baked beans is a fabulous. Well, it's a fabulous non-keto breakfast.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, every time I see pictures of somebody's breakfast in England, I'm like, what? Why would you do this? This is not baked beans. That does not go with eggs and bacon and baked beans. Those don't go together. Okay.
Okay. So when you're trying to replace the starchy things from your pre-keto days to thicken, you don't to look at your almond flour or your coconut flour or your psyllium husk or the things or other nut flours, because they're fats, they're not starches. Just, you're not going to have the same effect. They're going to be gritty. They're not going to taste good, but pretty much they're not going to work very well. So don't think about any of the things when you think about thickening a sauce.
Okay.
And I think for the most part, what people are trying to thicken is sauces, stews, gravies, soups.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, those are what you're trying to thicken.
Yeah, because I don't thicken stews anymore. I don't even try. And I don't thicken soups anymore. I just, it's got a broth base and, drink it, eat it broth or just use water, and I'm fine with it. But yeah,
I'm about to revolutionize the farm household then, because you're going to, like when you get some of what I tell you, you're going to have all the thick, yummy things back on your table. Sounds great. Actually, so let's just talk for a minute about why you want to thicken things.
Okay.
And you bring up a good point, is that the experience you get when you're eating thinner things versus other things is completely different. So, and you'll notice it if you've stopped thickening your soups, you'll notice that it's a completely different experience, because all your soups are brothy, i.e. thin and brothy, because you haven't got a thickener. But let's think about chicken soup, for example. If you think about a chicken noodle soup, which is a broth base, versus a cream of chicken soup, which is a thick, creamy base, the experience of eating those two different chicken soups is completely different. And really, the only difference between them is how thick they are.
Right.
So thickening can be really, really important to kind of your mouth feel, how it feels a lot more comforting maybe when it's thick. Even the flavor, it's a completely different experience to a brothy, thin experience. So that's one of the reasons why we like to thicken things. And for me, I'm a big fan of thick, creamy sauces. I like things to be thick because I find that a lot more comforting than the thinner, brothier soups. And comfort food is one of the things that people on keto miss, because it seems like all of their comfort food favorites are all the starchy things they can't eat anymore. So learn how to use thickeners so that you can recreate that comfort food feel could be super important in helping people to stay stick the course with keto.
Okay.
Because then they no longer feel like there's all these things they can't have.
Right.
Thickness can be super important. They make things cling. So when you think about a sauce, if it's thin, it often just doesn't do the job of satiating your taste buds. Like, you know, if you have a steak and you pour a thin sauce over it, you just do not have the experience as if you pour over a thick sauce that clings to the meat.
Exactly. Yeah.
So thickeners will make things cling. The sauces cling. It makes things more viscous. That makes things more filling, which means you actually need less to fill you up, which depending on where you are on a keto journey, could be good. A lot of people who come to keto, especially those who have a huge amount of weight, a lot of the ladies particularly that I talk to talk about having had no ability to portion control. So having sauces that are thicker, which will fill you up more, be more filling, can be really, really handy for helping people learn where their serving tolerance is. More comforting. I think thick foods are a lot more comforting. But you also get a much different experience, as I say, versus eating a broth soup, is eating a thick, creamy soup. So those are some of the reasons why we thicken. And they're really a lot to do with taste and enjoyment and the experience and the sensation of being full, rather than actually something you need to do from a cooking standpoint, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So thinking first about replacing the flour or the starches, we've already decided we're not going to use nut flours, we're not going to use psyllium, we're not going to use anything like that. So there's three things typically that are out there in the keto world, and two of them, people use them incorrectly all the time, and that one of them is konjac.
Yeah.
Sorry, not konjac. One of them is xanthan gum.
Okay.
Xanthan, and the other one is guar gum. And these are, they do thicken, but that's not their primary function. And I think a lot of bloggers have just passed on this kind of, you use xanthan or guar for thickening, but they're really not using the right thing for the job.
Okay.
And so this gets passed on, and then it becomes knowledge, and then everyone thinks, well, you know, that's what we do. But there's a much, much, much better thickener for keto that works much better than either of those things. So, but I want to go over xanthan and guar first, so that you know what not to use and why. So xanthan gum, its main function is providing structure in baked goods. So in good recipes, you'll see xanthan gum in things like biscuit recipes or cake recipes. Right. And what it helps to do is provide structure. So it's not gluten, and it doesn't replace gluten, but it kind of helps a little bit to do the job that gluten can't do because we've taken it out. So gluten is a protein that is very, very stretchy, and when you bake something, the biscuit or the cake or whatever it is rises, and then when it's heated, the gluten sets.
Yeah.
And that's what gives the structure to the baked good. So when you take it out of the oven, it doesn't collapse. It's the gluten that's holding it up in that rigid structure. Xanthan gum used in a baked goods will help to provide the structure that's missing because we don't have any gluten in it. Mm-hmm. However, a lot of people have been told to use xanthan gum as a thickener, but the problem with that is it's not really a very good thickener. It's more for structure than thickening. And xanthan gum will get slimy. That is one of the words things about xanthan gum is that it will get in a hot sauce or a soup or a stew. It has a tendency to get slimy very, very quickly because it's a gum. And especially in dairy-based sauces. So xanthan gum is not a friend except in baked goods.
Okay.
So you should just try and think about that. Okay, xanthan, all I use it for is providing structuring baked goods. That's it.
Okay.
The other thing where people go wrong is that they think that guar gum is a thickener. And it does thicken, but guar gum's main role in life is as an emulsifier. Now, an emulsifier, you have water molecules and you have fat molecules, which normally would not, they fight each other, they're enemies. Right. An emulsifier gets in between all the water and fat cells and it holds them together so that they don't separate. So that's what guar gum is magical for. And it's best used in cold applications, and it's best for emulsifying. Although it does thicken a bit, if you try and use it as a thickener, particularly if you use it in hot things, and particularly if you use it with dairy bases, it will be very slimy, and slimy is nasty.
Right.
Also, if you overblend guar gum, it will become very slimy, which is not pleasant at all. Guar gum also affected by time, heat, and pH. So guar gum will only work effectively in quite a narrow band of pH. So if you have something, a soup which has an acid in it, maybe it has some lemon juice, that is going to affect the ability of the guar gum to do anything useful at all. Okay. Also, if you heat guar gum too long or too high, the guar gum will initially do what it's supposed to do, and then it'll just go, no, and it'll just completely collapse. And also time. You'll notice if you make sauces or stews, gravies with guar gum, if you have leftovers, you put them in the fridge for the next day. When you get it out again, it does not reheat well. You'll find that the guar gum will leak. It will actually start releasing the liquid in the emulsion. And so you're going to get a very watery thing. And when you heat it up, that's only going to become worse. So it doesn't reheat well. And it also doesn't, if you make something with guar gum in it and you freeze it and then defrost it and then try to heat it up again, you're going to be sad. So for all of those reasons, guar gum is not your best friend as a thickener. Guar gum is best used in cold applications such as smoothies. It's magical in smoothies. And I know the world is not big on smoothies, but to give you an idea of how guar gum works successfully, if you have any of you who've come from your pre-keto days where you had fruit smoothies where maybe you threw a bunch of spinach in there, you'll know that once you made the smoothie, after an hour, it will start to kind of separate. If you, while you're blending it, if you put a little bit, half a teaspoon of guar gum in and just for the last 5 seconds, because as I said earlier, if you overblend guar gum, it will become gluey and slimy, and you don't want that. But gluey is not good. But if you just add it to the blender for the last 5 seconds, you will find that not only will you have the most glorious, thick milkshake-like smoothie, but you can put it in the fridge and take it out day and it will still be a lovely, glorious, beautiful, thick smoothie. So in cold applications, guar gum is magical at emulsifying. Also in ice cream, guar gum is magical at emulsifying. It will help stop ice crystals forming because nobody likes ice crystals in their ice cream. So it's magical for helping to restrict the growth of ice crystals. And the other thing it's good for in small amounts, because you don't want slimy or gluey, is it's good for holding things in suspension. So, for example, if you have a cream of mushroom soup that you've got big pieces of mushrooms in, a little bit of guar gum will help to keep the mushrooms in suspension so that all your mushrooms don't sink to the bottom.
Go to the bottom.
So you'll see that in some of my soup recipes, even though I've said generally don't use guar gum in hot things, right, you may find a little bit of guar gum along with the other thickener, because I'm trying to keep pieces in suspension, because nobody wants to eat their soup and then find a field of mushrooms at the bottom.
Right. Okay.
If that made sense.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that the majority of blogs will tell you to use for thickening stews, sauces, gravies, and are the two things that you should not use. Xanthan for baked goods and guar gum for cold applications, smoothies, ice creams, and cold things.
Okay. And
don't overblend it. But so what do you do then if you can't use those either?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Right? So, and this, you need to go up to Amazon right now and get yourself, it's called konjac flour. It's spelled Konjac. Okay. The other thing it's known as is glucomannan powder. And it is hands down the best keto thickener. I have tried them all. I once made like 54 batches of cheese sauce and tried every possible thickener that I could come up with. And konjac is absolutely the best.
It's cheap too. It's about $20 a pound.
Well, when you get your little tub, some of you are going to go, oh, that's $8. But here's the thing. Konjac flour has 10 times the thickening power of cornstarch.
Okay.
So you're only going to use a quarter of a teaspoon or a half a teaspoon, depending on how much liquid there is and how thick you want it.
Okay.
So the amount you use is very small. So don't be put off by the price, because that tub's going to last you for a very, very long time. But in the meantime, it'll mean that you stop wasting a lot of other food recipes that don't work or that you don't like. So what is konjac flour or glucomannan powder? It is, now don't get freaked out by this, but it's what they use to make miracle noodles. And I say don't freak out, because some people are like, ew, I hate miracle noodles.
Yeah.
Don't get confused that they're anything. They're made of the same thing, but it's a very different experience to the noodle. If you don't like the noodle, don't think you're not going to like the konjac flour. Okay. Because the konjac flour works exactly the same way as corn flour. It's tasteless. It's incredibly good at thickening. It's not slight. It's just, you will think that you have thickened your dish with cornstarch when you've used konjac flour.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely going to buy some of that.
You won't be able to tell the difference. The other thing that makes konjac flour magical, well, two things. One, it is an amazing emulsifier. I mean, you have like the fattiest turkey gravy stock in your turkey pan on earth, and with like wads of fat floating everywhere, and you're going to think there is no way this is ever going to come together into a sauce, and konjac will make it into the most fabulous key emulsified gravy ever. So konjac flour is magical also because if you have leftovers or you freeze it, when you get it out and defrost it, or when you get the leftovers the next day, it reheats perfectly. It doesn't leak, it doesn't get thin, it doesn't lose anything. It reheats exactly as it was when you first made it fresh. So it's also brilliant for making, so that you can freeze all of these things. You can freeze your soups and stews, and not worry about the sauce degrading over time. With konjac, it doesn't.
Very interesting. So how, pardon me, this doesn't, there's no starch in this. It doesn't raise your blood sugar. What is konjac flour? Where does it come from?
It's 100% insoluble fiber.
Okay.
And it comes from a root.
A root.
And it does nothing to us at all.
Okay.
Except make our food yummy.
Well, good deal. Good deal. Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of konjac flour. That was not on my list of things to try.
Your world. I have so many people write to me. Probably the thing I get most mail over is how konjac flour changed their life.
So let's say we're making a gravy. So we've made whatever, and we've got some oil in a pan. Let's say we've made country fried steak. We've got oil, coconut oil in a pan. Put a little milk, and then some konjac flour and stir. Is that pretty much it?
So what you can't do with konjac is you can't make it in the traditional way. You can't make it like a roux. It doesn't work like that.
All right.
And I've tried various ways of using, but the easiest way to do it is to put all your ingredients for your sauce in the pan and warm it up.
Okay.
Just put everything in there except the konjac.
Okay.
And then once you've got your sauce, your soup, your stew, whatever it is, nice and hot, then you get your quarter of a teaspoon or half a teaspoon of konjac, and you sprinkle it gently over the surface of whatever you have in the pan, and you're whisking with the other hand. So you're sprinkling with, so don't just dump it all in, but sprinkle it over the top, stir with the hand. The good thing about, if there was not enough good things about konjac already, one of the really good things about konjac is that it doesn't thicken instantly like the gums do, which like you look at a gum and it will go into a blob of thick gloop. Konjac doesn't do that. It does take a minute or two to really get thick. So you do have a little bit of wiggle room. So you get your hot bowl, your hot pan of soup or stew or whatever, everything's in there. You just need to thicken it. You sprinkle the konjac evenly over the surface while whisking or stirring rapidly with the other hand. And then you just need to heat it for a minute or two. And at first you'll go, oh my goodness, it's not working. But you leave it a minute or two and then it will start to get thick. And then if you do need to add, if you want it to be thicker, you just repeat the process. So it's super easy once you've got used to it. Typically, I'll start with half a teaspoon per cup of liquid. So if you've got a recipe that you already made that you love, that you just want to leave the corn flour or the flour out and you just want to thicken it, work on a half a teaspoon of konjac per cup of liquid. Okay. That'll give you a medium thickness. So that's the way to do it. And it might be a little bit weird the first time you do it, but once you've done it, sprinkling with one hand, stirring with the other, once you see the results, it'll become second nature, and it actually ends up being a lot easier than the process of making a roux used to be when you used to make a roux with corn flour. So okay. I typically leave all of my thickening to the end.
Yeah.
That's the last thing I do, is add the konjac and then heat it. If it's thick enough, then I'll go through that process again. And until you've reached the desired thickness. But the most important thing is waiting for a couple of minutes, because we're so used to the thickening being instant with flour or cornstarch or gums, if we've used them, that it just waiting a couple of minutes to see if it's the right thickness is probably the worst thing about the whole process.
Is there anything different that we have to do if you're doing like a stew? You've got say a bunch of ingredients in a crock pot or some kind of slow cooker. Do you just put the konjac in? Is that the last thing that you do to thicken that up, or you put it in the beginning?
You can actually do either. I have my cookbook, the Keto Crockpot. It's actually almost its birthday, so that's exciting. Some of the recipes I put the konjac in cold before depending on whether if it's something if it's a crock pot recipe that the whole thing is a whole bowl of like, I don't know, soup or something like that, I'll typically put the konjac in at the start with the other ingredients. And by the time the thing's finished cooking, it's this beautiful thick stew. But there are other recipes where it's like there's a short ribs with sour cream and mushroom sauce. I cook it all together without the konjac, and then at the end I lift out the short ribs and then add the konjac to make a sauce afterwards. So it varies depending on the recipe which way you do it. But because konjac is so fabulous at maintaining its thickness and structure once it's thick, you don't have to worry about it being, if you've put the konjac in at the start, it's still going to be great at the end of 8 hours when it's finished cooking. It doesn't degrade over time. So you can do either.
Yeah, that's interesting. You convinced me. I think I'm going to pick some up and start playing around with it. That's great. That's really great.
You can tell us how successful and how happy you are to have gravy the next time we record together.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. We'll surely one of these is available on Amazon Prime. We'll get it shipped over. Yeah, definitely.
We'll have it tomorrow. So there's another few things though. So that's what you shouldn't use, and that's what you should use. Okay. But also there's some other things that people get confused about, and I see this a lot in the Facebook group, is that people will say, what's the best thickener? And there'll be all these answers like cream cheese. No, well, does cream cheese thicken? It does, but that's by virtue of the fact that it's thicker than whatever you're putting it into, rather than, so it doesn't thicken. It doesn't make any thicker, except by virtue of the fact that if you put it in something thinner, the two mixed together are going to be thicker than the whole. The other thing you have to remember with cream cheese is that a lot of them have and carrageenan or gums in them already. Okay. So that's what's actually making it thick. It's actually the cream cheese. And also cream cheese is, and Anna and you and I were just talking about before we started, because I find that I can eat cheese, but if I have soft cheese, if I have cream cheese, I can look at cream cheese and put on weight. I don't know if it's the extra whey or the extra casein, but there's something about cream cheese that seems to cause more problems. So I'm not a huge fan of eating loads and loads of cream cheese, but if you're fine with it, that's okay. But as I say, and it's okay to use cream cheese to make things thicker, as long as you understand that it's not actually thickening.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Totally.
The same thing with cream. A lot of people will go, oh, cream, just put cream in. Well, cream doesn't make something thick.
Okay.
What cream does is you put it in, but then you actually have to cook it for about half an hour. And it gets thicker, but that's because you're driving off the water that's in the recipe, which is reducing the whole. It's not actually thickening things, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So you can make something thicker by adding cream and reducing it if you have half an hour, but just adding cream isn't going to make anything thicker.
Okay.
Gelatin. A lot of people think that gelatin is a thinner. Well, but gelatin is a gel. So it really depends what it is you're after. If you put gelatin in a gravy, it's not going to make it thicker, because gelatin only gels when it gets cold. So when gelatin is warm, so if it's something like a soup or a stew or a gravy or a sauce that you're serving hot, you're not going to get any thickening effect while it's still hot.
Okay.
You'll find it will gel splendidly in the fridge on the leftovers, but that's not really what you're going for. So gelatin doesn't thicken. It stays liquid while it's warm, so that doesn't help you. And in the fridge, if there's enough of it, it will gel, which is not the same as thick.
Okay.
Think Jell-O,
Right.
not the same as thick. It's so thick you could eat a spoon.
Right.
The one thing that does thicken, but again takes time, is eggs or egg yolks. And when I mentioned earlier about you can use proteins to thicken, that's really what I was referencing, was the use of eggs and egg yolk. And you can use eggs and or egg yolks to thicken things, normally used with things like lemon curd or some ice creams or more dessert things. People will use eggs to thicken, but it takes an awful lot of egg yolks to thicken a small amount of liquid, and it takes time, and it can go wrong quite easily. So that's why I typically suggest not doing that unless you love cooking and you're good at it and you're practiced and you can do an egg custard, while you're asleep. That's great. For a lot of people, an egg custard can be a bit dodgy. They can be a bit finicky, and I'm trying to stop you having fails. So egg yolks do thicken, but I wouldn't recommend them for general everyday sauces, stews, gravies like we're talking about.
Perfect.
And the other thing you can do, we briefly touched on mechanical methods of thickening. So when you make an emulsion for a mayonnaise, the other mechanical way of thickening is to reduce, which I touched on when we talked about cream, is that you can just simmer something away for an hour to drive off water, which will thicken it. So that is another option. But for most people who are making sauces and soups and stews, you don't want to have to simmer your sauce for an hour to get a thick sauce when you just use some konjac flour and get the same result.
Right. That is a lot of information about thickeners. Far more information about thickeners than I would have assumed existed before this episode. That's good. It was great. I mean, it was great.
I hope it's helpful.
Yes.
That's what happens when you get a food geek on the show.
Yeah. No. This is why I'm so excited about this series. I don't know what you call it. Series, probably just as good a word as any. But just getting to pick your brain about all this stuff. Because, there's things I like to learn about. But in order for me to like to learn about them, I have to know that they exist. There's so much when it comes to cooking. I just don't know. I just don't know what questions to ask. I don't know what is out there worth looking at. So, because you're right, there's not another podcast where food geeks, or I say that, I mean, there's not one in my circle of podcasts that I listen to,
right?
Where food geeks are talking about food. And then if you watch TV shows, cooking TV shows, they're not going over the nuts and bolts. They're given 3 recipes or 3 ingredients, and they got to make a great recipe. And that doesn't, those type of shows don't appeal to me anyway. They
also involve sitting and watching TV, which
right.
I don't know about, but I don't have a lot of time for that.
Exactly. So yeah, this is great. I really appreciate you doing this. All right. Anything else we need to know about thickeners?
I think I've remembered everything. I think I've covered it all. Your one takeaway is konjac flour is your friend. Konjac flour is hands down the best keto thickener. Take a couple of times to get used to how to use it. There is a blog, we'll link. I have a post on my blog which just does a very brief overview of what we've talked about here, just to remind you of xanthan for baked goods, guar gum for cold things, konjac for everything else, and what not to use.
Fantastic.
So
you can email me that. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, thanks. I will. Yeah. So that I have so many comments and mails and messages from people who say that this one thing, like the thick thing, was their Achilles heel, and konjac flour and understanding what to use guar and xanthan for at the right times has completely transformed their success in the kitchen, how much they enjoy their keto food. They're now getting spouses on board. their children on
Fantastic.
board. So this is why I wanted us to talk about thickeners as the number one thing, because from the correspondence I get, that's the thing that seems to have the biggest fundamental positive outcome for people who are moving to cooking keto. So I really hope this has been helpful. And of course, I'll open it up and say, if you have questions, email on, and maybe we can about them on the next show.
Yeah, definitely, guys, do that. I'm going to, you can go to mysugarfreejourney.com/podcast to find the show notes for this episode. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments there. We'll be more than happy to do them. And Carrie, thank you so much for coming on. This is great.
You're very welcome. I'm really, really keen to help people make really great food on keto, because it absolutely can be more delicious food you've eaten for the rest of your life. And we all know that for most people, if something doesn't taste good, it doesn't matter how good it is for them, they're going to find it really hard to stick to it. So my goal in life is to make it possible for as many people as want to be able to stick to the keto diet, because it's easy and it's delicious.
Fantastic. All right, Carrie, thank you so much for coming on. And those of you that are listening, hold on. We'll be right back with some more information.